All right. Good morning, everyone. This is the SIG CLI meeting for January 18. I personally don't have anything in the agenda for today other than status updates. So should I start the round with status updates? Okay. For me, this past couple weeks has been all about the general stabilization and reduce the amount of open issues story. So I've been mostly working on bugs and a lot of on code reviews and bugs triage, mostly, this kind of cleanup for our backlog of open issues. So doing that, I'm also working on a pull request, not yet opened, related to the reduced dependency of Cobra from commands. I know Tony has also been working on that, specifically about the get, delete, some of our basic commands. I'm working more in general, not as specific commands, but some ideas around how we can reduce it for every command. So doing that, and I'm also planning on starting on the designs for getting back actually to the designs on kubectl extensions. So it seems to me that we are pretty advanced in terms of subcommands as plugins. But we still have a lot to discuss about supporting third-party resources and federated API resources. So I'm planning to get back to those design around the extensions pretty soon. But the past couple of weeks for me was all about stabilization, open issues, and things like that. That's it for me.
Cool. I'll give it a quick status update as well. I started writing some concept guides for kube control. What I'm trying to do is break up a series of overview guides that give brief introductions around like more general topic areas that kube control tries to address, and then more in-depth guides for each one of those topic areas. I've seen the same question almost every week, which is like, what's the difference between kube control apply and the other commands? And we do have some documentation on it, but it's clearly not written in a way that's addressing that need. There's a PR out to fix an issue with apply, which is to allow explicitly nilling fields, which is getting pretty close to submission, so that's great. There was a third-party resource regression with apply that's causing issues for Box. The regression was caused by fixing another issue, which was getting the wrong version of the resource or getting an arbitrary version of a resource when there's multiple versions for one. So Minky's working on a fix for this now, and it'll probably be patched into 1.4 and 1.5. I have some thoughts on how we can do better with third-party resources than we are now, probably without too much work. So anyone who's interested in that can talk to me about it offline. And then there's two starter projects getting started. One is wildcard queries to do like globs. So you can say get pods and then say nginx star or something, and then it gets all the pods that match that glob, like with files. And then the other is for to print out a warning if a service doesn't have any matching endpoints when fetching it.
I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Joe. If we haven't met before, hello. I'm the CTO of Heptio. We're going to be focusing some of our efforts on, in general, making Kubernetes more usable. And I think the experience around imperative versus declarative and how we present that to users and the sort of terminology and guides that we build around that, I think are going to be important. So I wrote a doc a little while ago with some thoughts on this, and I'll share it with the group here. And I was talking with Phil a little bit and seems like this was a good place to start talking about some of this stuff. And then on the globbing thing, I think it's a bad idea.
Okay.
But we can talk about that. I don't want to.
Why don't I put the issue into the docs and then you can comment
Yeah,
on
okay.
that there.
Here it is.
Cool. So Joe, did you want to? I think one of the things you want to talk about was essentially apply versus other possibilities, and just some of the issues.
Yeah, I think, and there's, well, I as I was thinking through, so every time you think you have an original thought, you find out that there's 12 people already thinking about it and talking about it, and the issue was raised 2 years ago, and
Yeah.
Ryan Grant knows the number by heart.
Yeah, that's always true. He always knows the number by heart.
So I'm not surprised to see that there's a lot of thinking here, and so I think a big part of this is where can I add value versus resetting the conversation, right? Because I don't want to be bull in the china shop and reset stuff. So there's some thinking there. I think the biggest thing, and I think Tim is probably my biggest sort of sympathetic ally on some of this stuff, is that I think the three-way merge model with apply is one of these places where things look easy, but in reality, if you hit an edge case, there's no way to predict what the hell's going to happen, right? Short of reading the code. And I think it's I think it's easy to say, hey, we want to make this super easy for a user and come up with some sort of synthetic scenario and write code that'll work in that world. And then you sort of go down that path and you get to the end and you're like, wait a second, this is kind of crazy. And I kind of feel like we're there with the three-way merge and apply. I don't know what the options are moving forward here. I think, talking to Tim, there's some thinking around, okay, as we move to the V2 API, do we make it multi-layered by default with different owners and different layers and have explicitness of sort of what overwrites what? Another option is that we use, annotations or some other mechanism to actually have people leave breadcrumbs of which programs or which entities own which parts of the resource using some sort of mini language. So that way the tooling can warn you if you try and do an apply and the thing that you're applying actually whacks something that somebody else is controlling, right?
Yep.
Or if you have an if you have somebody, auto scaling is not the best example because there's sort of that verb that scales it. But in some ways, if you're using the scale verb to imperatively set stuff, that means that it's an imperative owner versus actually setting the stuff by doing a push, right? And I think scale is one of the best examples to look at this stuff where the three-way merge can really start to fall apart. So I don't know. So I don't have any solutions there, but that's one of the things that I'm looking at.
Yeah.
And thinking about.
Would you I have some thoughts on some of the things you said. Would you like to discuss them now? Is that good?
It's your meeting. It's my first time coming here, so I don't want to hijack stuff. I just wanted to start listening and start chatting.
No, I think this is a good use of the video conference. A lot of the stuff we could a lot of the other topics we can resolve out of band with less effort. So I agree with a lot of things you said. I do agree. One, I think apply, I've had to learn what it is 3 different times because it wasn't it's been explained to me different ways in different times. And it wasn't until I started trying to sit down and write a guide on what it is that I started to piece together kind of what it was.
And you're like, how the hell do I explain this to somebody then, right?
Exactly. It's it just does what you want, what you expect it to do. You're like, well, what do I expect?
Well, and that's the problem is it'll do what you expect it to do until it doesn't, and then it's God help you.
So I think there's a couple things we could discuss about apply separately. So it does some things that aren't just related to the three-way merge. which I think we want to keep, which is like looking at a whole directory and then recursively figuring out the changes.
Right, and then doing things like the support to delete resources that are no longer there.
Exactly.
So I think there's this flow of like I check something in, and then somebody maybe who's not me, maybe sometime down the line after somebody approves the diff or whatever says yes, and then that thing gets applied, and boom, it's like make it so, right?
Yeah.
And that's the model. And there's another interesting thing around can we view a directory of YAML files as sort of a mock API server that we can then use imperative commands against to actually write those. So can I do, like, does that make sense at all? So like there's sort of this mirror of like, can you use imperative to actually modify the YAML files that are in my Git repo, check those in, and then have apply just whack those things out?
Yeah, like can you do a scale on a resource against your directory and it updates the config?
Exactly. So now it's like, okay, the scale command can either use against my spec or it can be used against the live server. It doesn't matter. And that means that the sort of workflow and the lessons that people use from imperative, you don't throw all that stuff away. What you say is like, oh, you can use your imperative commands against your local copy. You can use that, check that in, diff it, replicate it across multiple clusters, what have you.
I'm going to write that down, actually.
That's in the doc.
Okay.
I'm trying to, I think I have a hard time getting it across because I think there's a certain symmetry there that once it sort of clicks for you, at least for me, I'm like, okay, yeah, that's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, and you know what? Just reading a doc I don't always retain everything in it. Sometimes I actually have to copy it just to remember it. It's weird. But yeah, so I agree. I think there's a number of things I don't think are mutually exclusive with apply. Like the thing you said about we could do the ownership, per field ownership with annotations, and then have apply look at those and then determine when it's going to break something, or when and then throw an error, right, or something like that. And then that gives you can do the hybrid model there, or you can do the model.
Okay, yeah, I guess you could have a mode where, like, for the stuff that there's clear ownership, apply recognizes that. For the stuff where there's no clear. No, I want to reset my base to be the thing that's really there, and I really want to do too, right? So in some ways, if we're going to do apply with a three-way merge, there also has to be a sync mechanism where essentially you say, I want to, like, I'm now based off of this other thing instead of the last thing that I applied, right? There's a sync mechanism that's missing here.
Yeah, I think one thing we need is a set of tools to define management. So like the situation you just described, the user experience I'd like to see is that every tool should have a consistent view of who owns which field.
Yeah.
And if they don't, if what they see differs from what they think it should be in terms of ownership, then by default, the tool doesn't make the change, but there's a set of commands that can be used to reset.
You can steal ownership. This doesn't have to be explicit. It doesn't have to be ACLed, but there's some way that you can say, hey, look, if you want to really like steal ownership of the replicas thing, then go ahead and do that, but you're going to break your autoscaler, and then your autoscaler is going to start throwing warnings because it's like, oh, you wanted me to scale, and I'm not the owner of the thing, so I'm going to be mucking with somebody else's stuff, and so I'm not going to do that, right?
So an annotation that says this component owns this field and a description of why they own it, and then like a tool that spits out, hey, this is why they say they own it. Are you sure you want to do this? Yeah. Seems reasonable. And that can still be done with apply.
Yeah, I guess I'm not arguing with apply as the name of the thing. I'm arguing with, like, can we make these semantics more concrete and more,
Totally.
Simpler.
I would love that.
And there's a trade-off between implicit and easy, and explicit and clear, right? And I think right now the current apply model is a little bit too implicit, which means that you do hit these confusing cases, and it's like, it's not doing what I want. I ran apply and scale's not updating. Why? Right?
Yeah. And I think I think there's different ways of approaching that problem. Like, I'm not sure if there's a single bullet. I think one thing we can do is add linters and diff tools to make it more clear what's going on, right? So just run like apply lint, and then it tells you, hey, here's all the things that are different, that are managed by other things. Here's all the things we're not going to update, but we noticed are out of sync or something like that.
Well, and if you've used Terraform before, and I don't know if you have, I mean, there's a plan mode there, right? So you do Terraform plan, and it lays out like, hey, I'm going to recreate this VM because you changed this property here, and that's actually a recreating property. And so there's a lot, I mean, it's not perfect, and it can get kind of verbose, but like at the end of the day, you'd have to be able to answer this question, like, why am I actually calling apply, and the thing that I'm expecting to update isn't getting updated?
Right. So there's one other. So what we've discussed so far are, like, I'd say, compatible with apply and additions and things that can be composed together, and we can decide the defaults later, but we can at least get the user experience we want by composition without tearing apart apply. There's another approach, which I'm not endorsing, but we should talk about anyway, which is like, you could get rid of the three-way merge altogether and just have like diffs you apply on top from the other end, right? So apply just does a straight replace, and then other owners are like, oh, set this field, always set this, apply this on top of.
Well, what you would do is you would have a layer cake model,
right?
And then you'd have different tools for editing different layers of the layer cake, right? And you would merge these together after the fact. And then there becomes the problem of, okay, who gets what order, right? Because your apply, you may think, well, most users are going to set the base layer, and then there's going to be all these other things on top of it. But those tools themselves have to actually figure out, where do I sit in the order here, right? Because you may have a policy agent that goes through and actually, does one thing, and then you may have some other sort of policy agent that goes through and does something else, and these two layer on top of each other, and now it becomes order dependent.
Yeah.
And so that's, in some ways, this is reminiscent of like the way things often get merged with, run parts, dir.d type things. And at the end of the day, people have a bunch of files, and it's just alphabetic, and it's up to you to figure out how that stuff works, right? So it may be that, like, there's a set of annotations. Those annotations ends up being diffs, or partials that get applied on top of it using some straightforward merge rules. When you call apply, if you don't specify anything, then it ends up being a layer called 0-base or something like that, or 0.user. Other things that run on top of that end up editing diffs. So maybe the imperative stuff ends up being 100-imperative or 1-imperative, right? Yeah. And then you could have an admission controller that actually says, hey, you know what? These users aren't able to set anything above level 50, right? And now I'm going to leave the other levels available for policy agents that get layered on top. So that means that no matter what the user does, they can't go ahead and override scale, or they can't go ahead and override this attribute.
And I think the simplest implementation there would be trying to do the same thing we're talking about with apply, where like the layers should not overwrite one another by default.
Right. At the end of the day, you're not doing any smarts. Or maybe what you do is you write these layers in, and then maybe there's a controller that comes through and actually looks at the annotations and then rewrites the damn thing. Or maybe that happens client side, or maybe it ends up being an admission controller that does the merge, right? So so at the end of the day, you write an annotation, you never actually write the spec. Yeah. And there's an admission controller that actually merges these things together.
Yeah. So, I mean, I'm not really in favor of that way. I think applies better, but.
Well, and if we're going to do that, that starts getting towards the V2 API stuff that Tim was talking about. And it's like, I really hate to like put that much crap into annotations. That's a little bit scary, to be honest.
So the way I'd kind of like this, so I like the things you suggested about apply.
I don't know which of them are right? So I just know that, like, I look at apply and I'm like, okay, logical decisions have led us to a crazy destination.
Yeah. So the things, I think the most urgent things I'd like to see with apply are, one, put together the explanation so users understand like what's going on. Two, there's a lot of things broken with it. Third-party resources panic right now. Right.
I mean, third-party resources are the most critical thing here, right? If you can't operate on those like you do with everything else, it breaks the facade.
So we need to fix that. There are one of the most complicated parts. I think most of apply is not that hard to understand, except for lists. Lists and merge keys are like pretty crazy.
Well, so the other thing, and you know, some of this is toolability, is that right now you go through and you dump that resource, and there's an annotation with a big old blob of JSON in it, and it's like that is not a great experience for anybody. So
yeah,
finding a way to you know, I don't know. I mean, like, maybe some of this is the sort of the diffing in the planning and sort of like show me, you know, what's going to happen and why.
Yeah, I think if we have tools, you shouldn't have to be dumping the resources to routinely figure out like what's going on or what your workflow is.
Yeah, but you know, sometimes you do get, and it doesn't actually show you the right fields that you want, right? I mean, it's like, so like there's a lot of times when the easiest thing to do is just do -o YAML and actually look at the whole damn thing.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, I don't think the annotation is if we explain the annotation maybe in the document and you're using apply, I don't think it's the most painful piece of it, but it's definitely a little bit annoying.
So I think it would be worthwhile to actually separate out the different commands into groups, whether they're actually imperative or declarative, or at least come up with some sort of name, so different tracks, so that people realize these commands work well together, these commands work well together. Okay, if you try and mix these things, you're going to have a bad time. And then here's how to convert from one mode to the other. Right. I think if we just play this off as modal, and maybe we use the annotation to say, hey, this resource is being managed declaratively. And so then if somebody goes through and they actually try and muck with it with a set operation, you get a warning saying, hey, this thing's being, like, even short of doing full ownership, just some sort of hint to the UI saying, hey, you're mixing modes here, you're going to have a bad time.
Yeah. So there's two things I'd like to do in that specific area. So the first is I wrote a guide, I posted in the meeting notes. You can check it out if you want, but it tries to do exactly what you're saying. I
started writing some comments on it, but I haven't published them yet. I'll read it.
And the first piece is we just need to be upfront with users and tell them, like, here's the different modes, and yeah, you can't switch back and forth and that sort of thing. I think the second thing we need to do is we need to do what you're suggesting, which is make the commands smart enough so that they don't interact with one another. If you try and run apply on a resource that doesn't have the annotation, it says it's in the wrong mode. And we can even write conversion commands, right, that will convert something that's using not using apply to set the right annotations there and do all the right stuff.
So there's other stuff that's like wacky here, wackadoodle. There's the and it doesn't work well across these things also. I'm trying to remember. What is it? There's the thing that actually stores in an annotation, record, the -- record. Record current kube control commands in the resource annotation. This is used for deployments, so that actually when you do a deployment sort of, you know, rollout list or whatever, the thing that actually shows you your history of deployments, it can actually have, oh, here's what actually caused this deployment. Mm-hmm. If you're using a declarative workflow, all of those commands that get recorded are kube control apply, kube control apply, kube control apply, right? Because that's the command that caused the change. And so I think it's worthwhile to think through. I think that that's another feature where it just, you know, it wasn't thought through with these sort of different modes. So as we add this stuff up, I think it's more than just, you know, documentation. We also have to figure out which of these features works well in which of these different modes. I don't know, are you familiar with the -- record option?
Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah, I mean, I hadn't looked into that. That's interesting. I mean, I think
I can dig up the issue on that if you're interested. I don't have it memorized. I'm not Brian.
I got plenty on my plate. But I'll find it.
Okay, so yeah, so I think, you know, getting some clarity there and actually essentially identifying these modes and guiding people to not mix the streams would be.
Yeah. So yeah, with the record, like for instance, I think there's things we could do, like we do the commit hash. And I think when we're guiding people on apply, like we want it to be close to a Git workflow. Like if you're using apply, we want to be like change your configs or check your configs into an SCM, probably Git.
Yeah.
And we expect you to make a commit message, and then we can build the tools so that when we call apply, it includes the last commit message and has links and all the fun stuff.
So it turns out that the way that it works, and I figured out a hacky workaround that's probably going to break at some point, is that if you don't actually set the annotation in the deployment, but you actually set it in the template, then it actually doesn't get whacked as it creates the replica sets from it. That thing comes through, and then it shows up in all the UI. So there's some workarounds here, I think, but some of this is just documenting this is the right pattern and the right way to use this stuff.
So this is definitely helpful, Joe. I think, like you said, some of this stuff we've discussed already and had similar ideas. Some of it's new and maybe coming at a slightly different angle, which is helpful. Like, I think a big problem we have is that there's a lot of work to do here, and a lot of it's like basic work to make something not broken. Like Box be like, our apply is breaking, and we can't, do a production push. Like that's kind of the level we're at right now, is like just survival mode.
Yeah, so I personally am not going to be able to spend a lot of time hacking code here. I've already committed to doing things in other SIGs that I'm falling behind on. It's very embarrassing. But we are going to be hiring some folks up. And so as we bring people on board, I want to be able to help have them help out with some of this stuff. I think, and it sounds like, you have some folks starting too, who are going to be taking on some starter projects.
Yeah. So I'm having one person full-time on this. I'm hoping to get another person full-time on this for at least 6 months. And so we'll make some progress. I just want to set the expectation that, like, if we're not working on the user experience stuff, it's not because we don't have ideas or don't think it's important.
So the other thing that I think is worthwhile, and some of this is just going to be influence, is that I think it's worthwhile for us to push to have a group of people who are really interested in what is the user model, what is the user experience around this, review new features to make sure that they hang together well. There's the API machinery group. They'll review APIs, but they're really looking at, is this correct from sort of a long-term model point of view? And it's very easy to have the right API end with a shitty user experience. And so right now with Kubernetes, for good or ill, the rubber meets the road with the CLI. That's sort of the interface with the user. We don't have the GUI is definitely secondary to that, and I think that's probably as it should be. A lot of this stuff, the most successful people in this world in terms of building awesome user experience, they don't think about a feature until they actually think about what is the command line, what is the stuff that we type, what does it do? And as we were doing kubeadmin, that was definitely something that we were taking into mind also, right? We were just really focused on, look, we can't have people copy around a token that's like, 100 characters long. It has to be short. And that drove a lot of the sort of architectural decisions that we're still working through here. That from a sort of pure API point of view, it seems silly, but from a user experience down at the command line, it ends up being critical. So I don't, I think we're going to have to work to get that, but it makes sense to make that user experience, that developer experience view be something that gets taken into account early on as features and aspects of the system are being developed.
Yeah, I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. I have a list. I don't know how you manage with GitHub issues, but I feel like
poorly.
I just like, as soon as it's a GitHub issue, it's just like lost to me forever.
I have some filters and I try and keep up on them, but then it turns out that starting a company takes a lot of time, and so I'm totally behind.
I'm able to keep up with the ones Matt mentioned on, as long as there's activity in my inbox. But if there's like no comment on it in a week, it's like I just can't find it. I need to start memorizing numbers, I guess.
I think you just have to not sleep. Yeah.
But I agree. I mean, there are some things I've been thinking about in that aspect. Like I do think the linting files is really important. I think the diff, being able to diff or do, like you're saying, a plan is really important. I think right now we don't have, one thing I'd like to see is we don't have a config file per directory to pin like flags or to pin like certain important things. And it's like for prune, I don't know if you've seen the prune command.
Yeah, the problem with prune is how do you make sure that you're pulling everything in and you don't delete stuff on accident?
Exactly. That's the problem.
You know, and you know, and eventually, and I understand it's super early days here. Like, I do think that we need to like build some like sort of higher level language into this stuff that gets compiled down. We're never going to get everybody agreed upon that, right? So it's like it's just not going to happen, right? But maybe if we actually use this sort of like manifest idea as a starting point for saying, okay, here's an extension. We have a language that instead of declaring YAML files directly, you actually have a YAML manifest, right? That actually points to other files. And that ends up being one of these early sort of plugins, sort of extension-y types of things, right? Where now instead of actually naming the files directly, you name this, it compiles down to a list of files. And so that becomes that pipeline there, and then that stuff goes and you're off to the races.
Yeah.
So that sort of manifest thing may be like an early way for us to exercise some of the plugin stuff that I think everybody wants to have happen.
That's one good idea. I think Git we might be able to leverage Git in an interesting way because then it stores the history of files in the directory as long as you know the directory root.
I hate to make that. So first of all, okay, so here's the thing. We brought on a tech writer editor, and she's starting to use Git, and the only thing she'd used before was like the GUI Git stuff, and I was showing her like the PR workflow and how all this stuff works and rebases it, and it's like, it really drives home the point that Git is a piece of crap, right? From a usability point of view, it's just awful. So I like the idea of being able to tie into some sort of SCM. I get a little bit scared when you say Git because I just don't want to special case it, right? I mean, Git's obviously going to be a big part of it, but I think like having a way such that, you know, this can plug into some SCM, some sort of version system makes a ton of sense.
I guess I'll just say there are systems in place that are able to track files after they've been deleted, right?
Yes,
and maybe we could leverage that or one of those. Or the last thing is labels, and that's what they're using right now. And it scares me the way they do it now because it's flag driven. So each time you run the command, you have to supply the right flag. So having a config at the beginning that says always apply these labels to everything you create, and then always use those labels to find things that you've deleted. Like this sort of thing, I think might.
Yeah, and it's not. I mean, I mean, we could use this to sort of like try out some of the sort of third-party templating ideas and like build some extension points there. I think, you know, in my mind, that makes a ton of sense. Okay, so like circling back to the glob thing, I think globs are a bad idea because then that encourages people to put structures into names, and names shouldn't have structures. They should use labels for that. Pretty soon you're going to have regex and you're going to have people pulling like real data out of these things. This is how Borg went, and it was a disaster.
So the motivation for globs is you have controllers that you create, and those create other controllers and more controllers and so on until they create pods. And the pods at that point have some name, like the deployment name, and then like some string and some string, and so they already have this structure in them. And the point isn't that we want to pull out the structure, it's that we want to dump the structure so that when I create a deployment and it creates 5 pods, I can just get the 5 pods using the name of the deployment. Now, another thing we talked about was...
But wait. But the right thing to do in that way, and I'm going to say right here, is that we could have kube control get. You could do pods, and then you could actually have, you know, labels from, and then you could actually name your deployment there. So that's essentially saying, get me all the pods for this deployment. And then behind the scenes, that should actually go through and actually look up the right label query to make that happen.
Yeah, so that's the alternative, is to...
That's the right way.
Specify which controller. Maybe, I mean, I'm not sure I totally agree with the premise that the tool is bad because people will do bad things with it, or the capability is bad because it will allow people to do things we don't want them to do.
I hear you. I think I would rather understand the use cases and encourage people to use labels and make it easier to use labels. And you know, and it's not that if we're going to have development time and design effort go into stuff, would it be better to actually sort of say, hey, can you specify a label query by introspecting a deployment or a replica set, or do we do globs, right? And so, like, you know, if you're going to give somebody a starter project, which one is the right starter project? And the globbing stuff will, I mean, there will be edge cases where this stuff breaks down because somebody will say, oh, I'm going to have something called, you know, alpha, and then I'll have another thing called alpha beta, and then somebody's going to glob and they're going to forget the dash and they're just going to do alpha star instead of alpha dash star, and then alpha star will pull out alpha beta also, right? And so now you're like, oh, well, dashes are special, and so we'll make the globs actually be dash aware, similar to directories and slashes, and then it's like, well, you know, the world's over, right? I mean, like, I don't know, right? I mean, like, there's going to be edge cases that are going to lead people in the wrong direction that will lead to outages because now I have something that's actually acting on all the alpha stars. Sometime down the road, somebody does an alpha beta, you know, deployment, and then the world breaks, right? And it's a total landmine that's waiting for them if they're actually using globbing this way.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on if they're doing if it's being consumed by a machine or by a human.
Anything on the command line is an API. I mean, like, this is the world.
I mean, describe isn't.
But I bet you that there's somebody out there doing describe and then parsing it away with awk and sed and grep.
There absolutely is. I've seen the issues, and I've seen it break when we changed the describe portion.
It is what it is, right? And so like.
But I still think it's worth having describe. I don't think the solution there is to, like, take away describe because someone's going to use it in a programmatic way. We just have to be careful about making sure that
describe has. Okay, I hear what you're saying, but yeah.
Anyway, I don't feel that strongly about the glob stuff. Like, I think it would be simple. I love it with files. I think I could probably.
The files don't have other metadata on it. They probably should, right?
Yeah, that's fair. I don't know. Maybe tab completion. I don't know. But how about if you want to just comment on the issue, then maybe we can resolve it there. And
okay.
The label thing's fine. Maybe you can just post, like, here's the UX I envisioned, and we can go with that if everyone agrees it's fine.
Okay. Sure.
Cool. Anything else that we have on the agenda? Joe, sorry, you were going to say something, Fabio.
No, I don't think so. At least in the agenda, I didn't have anything for today other than status. So, yeah, it was actually great to have Joe here and to fill our agenda with some actual topics.
There's plenty of work to do. Like, don't worry.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, this is me and Fabiano talking about movie user. Joe, so this has been super helpful. I know.
Let's keep the conversations going. Like, you know, I'm slammed, so I don't know how much real work I can do yet, but eventually, you know, I am interested in having some folks working on this, and so, you know, hopefully we can sort of pave the way and have a good backlog of ideas and stuff to start designing and working on. So
yeah. I like your feedback. I'd like to continue to get it, but I don't want you to feel like I know, like, as you said, you're slammed. What's the best way to get, like, the level of engagement that's right for you? Like, I can put all the features in the agenda meeting notes, and then you can just look at them every week and see if there's anything more common on.
Yeah, I'll keep trying to make the meetings, you know, whenever I can, and so I think that's a good way to do it. As I bring folks on board, I think we're going to have to do our own prioritization exercise here and see where we want to put them. I think this is a critical place to actually start leveraging people. Hopefully, you know, and hopefully, as towards the end of this month, work on the book will calm down, and some other stuff will calm down, and I'll be able to actually have more of my own bandwidth to actually bring to bear.
Okay.
Yeah, I do think this crosses over with some of the config and templating stuff also, and I just don't know where to talk about that stuff, because at some point it's like, oh, that's part of API machinery, but like, holy crap, that cannot be the like sort of the kitchen sink of every discussion that has any substance that cuts across the.
I think this is a good group to talk about that stuff. It's something my team's working on at Google, or will be working on and intends to take on. If you look at the apps, or sorry, I think it's the CLI 2017 goals. Like one of the goals is looking at the end-to-end ownership from I have a binary jar thingy to running in Kubernetes, right? Yeah. And that means some part of that is factoring your configs, right? And the solution there could be templates in the API machinery, but it could be JSONnet, or it could be something entirely different, right? And so our team definitely needs to look at what the right solutions for someone structuring their configs and directories and factoring them so that there's not redundant content in them.
Yeah, I think the way that I've expressed this to people is that when we're talking about programming languages, there's this, and this is the Gosling thing, right, of make the easy things easy and the hard things possible. When it comes to web APIs, we really don't have the tool set to be able to achieve that. We're either in a position where we have a lot of nitty-gritty details and the hard things are possible, or we're in a situation where we oversimplify things and it's super easy to approach, but there's no way to actually get at sort of the underlying depth and complexity. And I think a great place to see this, in Google, is if you look at the load balancing config, right, in GCE, right? You need to configure 3 or 4 objects to get a load balancer up, and that's what's exposed in G-Cloud. And then when you go to the UI in the console, all the UX designers are like, that's too complicated, we're going to fix it, right? And so you have the sort of streamlined view that fixes this, and then there's an advanced button. Well, the problem with the streamlined view is that if you do stuff that doesn't fit in that, then it breaks, right? So if you actually do have these unique needs, then it breaks. But the other important things is that we're teaching users one model of the world, and then as they move to something like G-Cloud, or as they get more complex, all that knowledge, all that understanding, all that intuition that they've built up, they essentially have to throw away and start all over again.
Yeah.
And so I think the problem with config is how do we actually sort of do that thing where we make the easy things easy and the hard things possible, and make it work in a bunch of different contexts. And so that's the sort of worldview I'm bringing to this.
Yeah, I think that makes a lot of sense. I think it's possible. I have some ideas on how to do it for Apply, like on our discussions that we've had. I think we can arrange a gradual introduction of individual pieces of complexity that fit into the puzzle.
But right now, I mean, I'm writing this book, and it's like, you have to get 8 chapters in before you have a good working understanding of the thing.
Yeah.
Well, and I think it's something that we start out with, like kube control run, and then it's like, oh, and that'll create a deployment, but we're talking about pods now, so ignore the whole deployment thing, right? I mean, it's like I don't even know how, so you're starting off and you're like, don't ignore the man behind the curtain, right? Actually, there's this deployment thing, ignore it. You're going to get a pod and it's going to have a random name, right? So that's pretty much what we're telling users in the book.
Okay. You looked at the new guide, the interactive guide with the that we have on the site?
I probably have missed it. Can you send me a link?
Yeah, it's kind of cool. Have you heard of Katacoda?
Oh yeah, I knew that was being used. I hadn't actually run through it.
We grappled with a lot of the same questions, and I mean, I don't know if we struck the right balance, but we did something. And you can look at it and see how you feel about it.
Is this the way? I just did something and then an alert popped up and I have too many tabs. Damn it.
I can put it in the meeting notes too.
No, I had it just up like 3 seconds ago.
Yeah, I'll put it in again.
I'm going to find that tab a week from now.
Or do you see it in the chat? posted it.
Oh, okay, yes. Is this the... Yeah, okay, yeah, I'm going through that now. Yeah, okay. So the interactive tutorial, creating a cluster.
So this attempts to walk through purely through the CLI about what introduce API server and nodes and like services, deployments, scaling, and rolling updates.
Now, is this running real code in the background, or is it just sort of all dry labbed?
No, it's a real Docker container running local kube.
Okay, interesting. Yeah. Minicube's a little bit unfortunate because it's just one container, but
yeah, it's not. it's hard to really get the experience, and it doesn't have persistent disks, and it doesn't have external load balancers. I mean, it's somewhat limited. Yeah.
And and things like ingress and stuff like that are going to be part of the core experience at some point. We'll have to get there. All right. Well, thank you for letting me spout off.
Yeah. So probably what I'll do is I'll continue to update the meeting notes with new starter projects that get added or new features that get requested that we'll start development on. You can probably, even if you don't attend the meeting, if you want, you can just go look at what those are.
Sounds good.
And then I'll continue working on these guides.
Yeah, and if there's concrete things you want to talk to me about or get an outside perspective, feel free to reach out and I'll make the time.
Sounds good.
All right, nice talking to you guys.
Later, guys.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.